This unusual story began 3 months ago. As usual, the house where Rosalia lives is never quiet, if not the father, so his son makes it impossible to be here. The girl has been patient for a long time, but today, her patience is over. Her brother is chasing her around the house. He is literally furious that all his bad drinks have run out. He started demanding that his sister solve the problem, as he himself has no money for a long time. So long that he can't remember when he last bought something. Rosalia de Hesse, the adopted daughter of Baron Hesse, who has not spent a single day here that there has not been some shouting, some begging and humiliation. Every day someone needs something from her, and in most cases, her money. It's so outrageous that her brother yells at her and gets angry, as if she should clarify and consult with him before spending the money wherever he says, if he allows it at all. Rosalia is tired that their money is always under control. Someone else can't even know about it or see it, and her money is always considered to be shared. And when she asked for a small amount of money for medicine when she was sick, her brother advised her to find a job, and now that he has the problem, there is no thought of a job. It is easier to just ask someone for it. Things have gone so far that he takes her by the hair and orders her to sell something valuable, so she can prove that she loves her brother and is willing to do anything for him. Sounds too unfair and outrageous. Strange. The girl has lived in such conditions all this time and has not gone crazy. Her father, Baron Hesse, fell ill and settled down, and with it the whole family's fortunes collapsed. This happened very quickly and affected even the amount of food in the refrigerator. And meanwhile, the moment came when Rosalia was already too tired. She sees no other way out of this situation but to get rid of the man who does not stop using her and allows himself to be rude for no reason. The guy was supposed to fix the situation, to keep the reputation and wealth of the family at least at the same level. But because of him, everything is getting worse. She had to think very quickly. For if things continued like this, he would rather do it to her than try to do anything useful. The sharp object was already in her hands. What was decided must be done. She can't even call her brother a human being. He's no different from a wild animal, and all he knows how to do is consume and ruin the lives of everyone around him. He saw her knife, and he was quiet. The sister is coming closer and closer. Each step she wants to do it more and more and imagines how her life and not only hers will improve afterwards. Suddenly, at the very last moment, she had a picture of her dead father, and the thought that even though he was in the other world, he might not like it very much, had to change her mind very quickly, and she did something she never expected even from herself. Rosalia didn't touch her brother, but when he started screaming and covering himself with his hands, she started cutting off his hair, and so quickly that his brother didn't even notice it. He had already resigned himself to what was waiting for him and couldn't think that everything would end this way. When he opens his eyes, he sees a completely different person in front of him, and wonders how the short haircut affects his appearance, all the length left in her hands. The girl was so smart that she even thought of something to say, and how to explain that it just was. She smiled slightly and said that he was kind of too scared, and really, could he think she would do anything else? For he had just asked to sell something of value, and there was nothing else left in this house. She thought for a moment that perhaps her brother might wonder if he was asking too much of her, that she had to sell her own hair, and he had only had to yell at her. Anyway, she's not going to live with him anymore. Rosalia gave him her hair, said it was the last thing she could give him, asked him to finally disappear from her life and never come back. This man didn't care so much about the efforts of others that he didn't even say a single word. Silently took his hair and went about his business. It was a little insulting. I doubt he would have made such sacrifices for someone as his sister did. The man just kept silent, as if she had given him a glass of water. It's very ugly of him. Now I can see why she hates him so much. Rosalia looks at him and is even afraid to ask if he understood her correctly. She hopes that this is the last time she will look into his eyes and hear that horrible voice that makes her feel sick. If just now it might seem that he had shown himself to be a very ill-mannered man, that was not all. Lastly, the fellow turned around and called her the nastiest person he knew. He just hasn't looked at himself from the outside and has no idea what it is. A truly nasty person, and to not see him ever again in his life. Without a second thought, one would even want to sell the last thing that's left. If her quiet life, harmony, and security are at stake, his sister is prepared for just such a thing. It is better to be hairless than to live with a man like him, from whom one never knows what to expect. A little unaccustomed with short hair, but in general, the girl is not sorry. Short haircut will be a symbol of a new life, without everything superfluous. And that was not all. She had made sure that her brother would be held accountable for his behavior and would not be able to say goodbye to her so easily. As soon as he went around the corner, 2 mercenaries were waiting for him there. They'd been waiting for him all this time. They knew exactly what he'd be wearing, and they're the ones who recently took pity and lent him a large sum of money. Some of them are going to have to work and learn to take responsibility for their actions. This should be good for him. Meanwhile, the girl is at her house trying on new clothes, but for some reason, it doesn't quite look like anything even feminine. The shirt looks very big, like it was left by her father or someone else, but definitely not the girl's. Rosalina also chose such pants, as if on purpose wants to be less like herself, as if she is matching her image to the new haircut to hide her real sex as much as possible. The thing is that in this world there are strict traditions, and if someone sees a girl with such short hair, there will be a lot of judgment, so it's easier to pretend to be a boy for a while until it grows back. It's not exactly an ordinary world. The girl knew from the very beginning that everything was going on a plot. She felt it from inside, and waited with confidence for the most interesting thing to begin. The girl whose body she got some time ago is a minor character, and instead of staying in the light, she will become the Duke's servant in the darkness, completely devoted to him. And after a while, she will simply die. She is doomed to a bad end. She knows it and is not even upset. Rosalina believes that if it is inevitable, there is no point in being sad. One should live even such a short life in such a way that one can be proud of oneself later on. Very soon the Duke himself should come and hire her as his new maid. It had been 3 years since she had entered this body, and since then, the girl had been preparing for this moment and had no doubt that sooner or later, it would happen. Even though she realizes that the plot is inevitable, there's still a little desire inside to try to make a difference, to at least live this life a little longer than she should, and she's already got some ideas. In the original story, Rosalind falls in love with the Duke very quickly. She sees only in him the meaning of her life and does not notice any around. But the girl believes that this man cannot be so beautiful to enchant her as the real Rosalind does. At least, with this appearance of the girl is unlikely to achieve from him reciprocity, and also need not forget that the most important thing, in any case, do not turn to him for help. It is not worth it in general to attract unnecessary attention to themselves. Meanwhile, the Duke is almost at the doorstep. He has been looking for this house for a long time, and at first he didn't even realize whether it was the right address or not. The house looks too unremarkable. It's hard to say that Baron Hesse used to live here. They made sure it was right several times, tried to get closer, and doubted to the last that it was here. It was immediately clear to him what must be. The house looks so terrible because it has not been properly looked after for a long time. With such debts, it is unlikely that anyone has the ability or desire to do so. It turns out that he came here for a reason. The guy thought that even if he sells this mansion, he will not get even half of the amount he borrowed from Baron Hesse, to which the assistant replies that he carefully read the report, and it says that he has long been dead and all he inherited his eldest son Antonio, and that he has a daughter named Rosalia de Hesse, who can also claim her share of the house. Meanwhile, the gates open, but they don't notice it. I really wonder who managed to meet them, though it's unlikely there are any helpers here who would agree to work for free. Rosalia comes out to them, but from the first seconds she introduces herself as the Baron's son, Antonio. Now it is clear why she is dressed like that. Apparently the haircut was not an unexpected decision, it was a carefully planned plan. It turns out that Antonio won't be coming back here. She could very easily deceive anyone and pretend it's him, the son of the Baron who owns the house. If this works, she'll make money, go anywhere, and all because of this, which is all it took to shorten her hair and kick her brother out on the street. That is, he holds out his hand to the Duke, but the latter seemed a little embarrassed and began to scrutinize his face. Really, this isn't going to work out well. So he remained silent for a few more minutes, not blinking once, as if he'd guessed everything from the first seconds and her first word. Antonio is still holding out his hand, wanting to say hello, but he's just being ignored. He's getting nervous and afraid that something will go wrong, and things won't be as easy as he thought they would be. And now, Duke asks how the guy can know him and why he went outside so quickly, as if he knew when and who was coming to see him. Antonio smiled and asked who in this empire might not know who he was. Duke Richard, a name everyone has known since birth. Richard says that if that is so, then the boy must know the reason for his appearance here. The Duke did not delay. He said at once that he had come to collect the debt of Baron Hesse, that is, of his father. The guy was curious to know the specific amount, because his father never admitted it. He always postponed this conversation, so as not to embarrass and not to scare his children. It turns out he owes the Duke 5,000, a sum so enormous that it should be enough to buy 3 huge mansions. But if he gets this estate, it's not even worth 3,000. Antonio asked to be seen as an adult, so Richard questioned how he was going to give the rest of the money. The Duke doubts very much whether the lad has the means to give such a huge sum right here and now. And of course, he is quite right. Rosalind, that is, Antonio, has not a penny. He says that, of course he can't give that much at the moment, but that doesn't mean it won't happen. He's very willing to ask for some time, after which he'll definitely give it all back. Of course, there is a possibility that the Duke will not listen to anything. He may not be interested, but it all depends on whether Antonio can offer him something interesting. For now, he's asking for just 1 year. Supposedly in that time, he'll try to earn that amount, and maybe even a little faster. There is an awkward pause. With each second, the guy is more and more afraid of his answer and starts to think what he can say in case of refusal. This look evokes a variety of emotions. It is impossible to calm down for a second. No one knows what to expect from this person. He can at any time set his own terms and will not want to wait only time. Rosalina, under the guise of Antonio, is trying hard to show her confidence, though inside she is almost trembling with fear. Now everything depends on only one answer. After such loud promises, it is very important for the Duke to hear a detailed plan. No one will want to wait so long suspecting that these are empty promises that will lead nowhere. He sees those confident eyes and eagerly wants to know what exactly this guy is going to do. He doesn't believe that at that age you can only make money in even 5 years. Antonio was lucky that he didn't refuse right away, and even let him explain, hinting that he might be up for it. Besides, Richard heard long ago that the guy was expelled from the academy and became a hopeless person who can't even earn a piece of bread, and it doesn't look like he has any skills at all. Rosalina realized that if everyone already knew what her brother was like, and if the Duke was giving him this chance, it almost worked out. He almost believed a man who had no reputation for a long time now. Antonio replied in a calm voice that he hadn't just wasted his time walking through the alleys. He had learned a few things along the way. They started walking around the house, and Richard asked if, really, the guy wanted to say he had a trump card up his sleeve that might interest him. The only thing that gives her so much confidence is that she completely knows the plot of everything that's coming next. She knows the location of the crystal mines that won't be discovered until 6 months from now. Also, the location of a sunken ship full of jewels is very valuable information that could be worth more than any money, and maybe Richard will still be in debt. But there's an even easier way to solve all your problems. It's art. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with this case, but the main character, the Crown Princess, has always been very passionate about art. She found unknown artists, helped them become famous, and made a fortune out of it. This idea was picked up by many people, but she was the most successful at it. It turns out that now Rosalina will have to overtake her. We need to find all these artists first, and ideally, arrange for them not to collaborate with anyone else. Antonio explains that he intends to use the information gathered in the alleys and his old eye to get his hands on valuable works of art. Duke listened carefully and thought that it sounds good, but there is one problem. If a guy has no money, how can he buy anything? And as you know, art is the most expensive thing you can buy. The guy was ready for this question. He smiled and said that, as is, any business needs startup capital, so Richard should understand everything. The guy explained that this is the very reason why he wants to go to him, and that's all he needs from him. A time investment that will pay off tenfold later on. It would only take 20 coins to start, although it seemed that the sum would be much larger. Richard had no idea that unknown artists would give their work for such pennies. For him, this money means nothing, and in general, few people will refuse to invest such a small amount of money, with the possibility of getting much more later. This is the amount he is willing to lose, even if it does not work out. It turns out that he needs that amount of money to borrow. Richard smiled a little. On the one hand, he knows what his answer will be, but on the other hand, everything seems kind of weird. The guy explained that it wasn't that much money, and it didn't really add to the debt. But if he gave it, provided everything worked out, everyone would be happy and probably make even more money. He only asked me to believe him once. Hertz already knows his address, and in case of anything, he won't have anywhere else to hide. There's no point in him deceiving the Duke, who can find him anywhere in this world, and it will take him less than a few hours to do so. Eventually, Antonio promised to show him the grave of turning 20 coins into 500 in just 2 months. Richard still has his doubts, but he's agreed. The debt isn't big enough to turn down such an interesting idea. Naturally, the guy thanked him not only for his help, but also for the time he could spend on his business. Only the Duke wanted to leave. He suddenly had an idea so that it wouldn't be so easy. He had conditions that he had just thought up. Within a minute, some other people came into the room and started grabbing his arms and wouldn't let go. Antonio was so badly frightened that he accidentally spoke in his real female voice. It was very unexpected and incomprehensible. Everything happened right after the words about conditions. But the Duke didn't warn about anything. It was like he gave someone a signal so the guy wouldn't notice it. No one responds to his questions. He was even lifted into the air. They didn't even have to work hard to do it. Antonio thought they'd turn down his offer and decided to punish him for being so bold. Or maybe because it all seemed like some kind of deception or something like that. Even the Duke made no secret of the fact that he had no reason to believe the promises and attempt to run away. Supposedly, he needed this time for a business idea. It turns out that if they didn't believe him, Antonio is either going to be punished or something even worse that he's afraid to even think about. It all depends on how tough Richard is. And in the meantime, he asked when this estate was sold, where the boy was going to live until he paid off the debt. Rosalind hadn't thought of that. She was so sure of herself that she hadn't thought it through. It was good that the Duke had asked about it right away, and she hadn't had to face it unexpectedly. By some miracle, the Duke was able to believe the guy. He simplified the terms and asked him to repay the debt under his strict control. And until it is not fully repaid, Antonio will always be by his side. He will have to serve Richard in the ducal house like all his other assistants, only for free. He will do it even if he doesn't want to. Now was not the time to refuse or resist. She was lucky that Richard was calm today and had the will to make concessions. All these years, the girl had been thinking a lot. She had tried to avoid becoming a maid by various methods. She even had backup plans. But nothing worked out. Everything happened exactly as it shouldn't. Now they're dragging him around like a little kid. They can't even feel his weight. And meanwhile, as much as she didn't want to, the girl had become a disguised servant of the ducal household. I wonder how long she'll stick around and how quickly her real identity will be revealed. Especially wondering what will happen if that does happen. Came the next day? Yesterday she never had time to be given a tour and shown what was where here, so from the morning, woke up and did just that. Rosalina hadn't planned on pretending to be a boy for so long and couldn't even imagine that it would last every day for the next little while, maybe even months. Meanwhile, they were in the room he would now be living in. At first sight, the room was too good for the assistant the Duke had appointed him yesterday, and all for the fact that he was a little on a different footing from the other servants. The assistant explained that although Antonio is a servant of the ducal house, he remains a business partner who cannot live in the same conditions as the personnel. It was placed here for a reason. In a dark room, nobody will want to think about any development, money, and here the desire to do something will appear by itself. Such beauty will help to solve all the problems much faster. But in a dark and ugly room, everything would be the opposite, so it is very important. And also, the room was chosen specifically so that he could get to the Duke's office as quickly as possible, and there was no excuse for him to get lost because of the huge corridors. After that, they decided to walk around the house a bit more to get better acquainted, and suddenly there was a girl. She went down to the first floor, and when she stepped on the last step, she tripped a bit. Of course, Antonio noticed it at once. He had just happened to be near and caught her, expecting to hear some pleasant words. Things happened differently. Despite the fact that he had actually saved her, otherwise the girl might have hit very hard, she just remained silent and even made a slightly disgruntled look, and then asked how much longer he was going to hold her like that, as if now she might fall too. It became very awkward and even hurtful. It turns out it was better if he had walked by and not paid any attention to her at all. The guy didn't even have time to say anything before she started wondering where they got such a strange servant from. If even the girl didn't see her as a girl, it means that Rosalind did a very good job. She completely got into the role, and not once during the whole time in a female voice, and it's very difficult, especially without training. A little later, it turned out that she is Klaus's sister, and most of the time her behavior is no different from today. She very often doesn't like something, and it's always everyone's fault but hers. Surprisingly, after all those unpleasant words, she complimented him that he was very handsome, and even she liked his clothes. It was clear how quickly her opinions and moods changed. Rosalina tries to find 1 second to see if everything is under control, as Katerina wants Antonio to be her personal servant. Of course, all this is far from the plans of Antonio and this assistant next to him. They tried to explain that, for the time being, it is impossible, but she is not interested in anything like that. Personal servant, a trend spread among noblewomen. To have an attractive servant who acts as an ornament for the lady. Sounds strange, but it has been practiced for more than a decade. During this time, no one thought it strange that handsome guys are used as ornaments. As soon as Antonio apologized and wanted to say that it was impossible, he didn't even have time to finish his sentence when some woman runs up to them. She looks like Katerina's assistant, because her mother or a relative wouldn't run down the hall so fast. It's against all the rules of etiquette. At the very last moment, when they had to leave, the girl asked to remember that in any case, tomorrow Antonio was going to meet her, and it was advisable to be ready from the very morning, the earlier the better. Then she starts running away from this woman as if she did something bad and doesn't want to get caught. Now I see why she was in such a hurry to get down to the first floor. The woman ran past them so fast, she didn't even have time to say hello. She was clearly interested in something else right now. The assistant is very surprised by this situation and even called Antonio lucky. It is a privilege to catch the eye of a lady on the first day of work. For Rosalina, it is a very nice compliment, even if she pretends to be a boy. Without her natural beauty, none of this would be possible. Anyway, she doesn't plan to add any other role at all. She didn't want to stay here at all, and she didn't think anyone would kick her out of the house at all. And she ends up lying in a room in the Duke's house and has no idea how fast she can get back in. The first day was enough to realize it's unlikely she'll be able to pretend to be a guy for more than a week. It's impossible to describe in words how much she wants to take off those clothes, put on some light dress, take a shower, relax, and finally, start talking with her normal voice without straining herself. If all these people only knew the truth, they wouldn't even get angry. They would start to wonder how she even got to this point and was able to pretend to be another person, much less her brother, in such a realistic way. It's very strange that Alejandro hasn't come yet with the money he promised to give him. He said he would do it later, but it's already evening and it's unlikely he'll visit him tonight. Rosalind hoped that he would hurry up, because he wanted some peace of mind and to know that no one else would come to him. It was so uncomfortable here that even in such a luxurious room it was impossible to relax and feel safe. She wanted to get out of those awful clothes immediately, if only for a minute, because it was impossible to do so. Besides, it's too late outside and it's unlikely anyone will come to see him. It's definitely going to be tomorrow, so Rosalind did what she's been waiting for all this day. Those constricting clothes had squeezed her terribly all day long, and now you can really see how much she's enjoying this moment. Except that at the same time, literally 20 meters away, someone is approaching her room, and it's too bad she can't hear it. The girl resigned herself to the fact that no one would definitely come until morning, closed her eyes, felt harmony, and relaxed completely. And suddenly there was a knock at the door. Though just now Rosalind was saying who in their right mind could come to a person's house at this hour. And yet, someone had figured it out. Now you have to get dressed very quickly, regain your former appearance, and squeeze out the man's voice again. The agony is not over yet. To stall for time, she asked who was at the door, but no one answered anything. There was complete silence, so it became even more difficult to dress back up again. She manages to put on that constricting piece of clothing, then she opens the door, certain that Alejandro is there. She didn't hesitate to ask why it was so late, but instead she saw him, and in such a way, as if he was also preparing for sleep, but suddenly decided to come in just for a minute. Richard explained that his assistant had some business to attend to, so he had come in person, and then, very surprised that Antonio was trying to cover himself with a vase. It looked very strange. The Duke knows how heavy it is and asked what's the matter and why he can't put it on the floor. He can't even see his face. And if Antonio is going to hold the vase for the rest of the conversation, it's going to be very heavy. The guy explains that he just wanted to change things around a bit, to customize the decor, and this vase was really bothering him. Suddenly, there's that moment that can ruin everything. The Duke hands over this envelope, and it turns out that it has to be taken into the hands that are occupied by a huge vase. But at the same time, he can't let her go. Antonio asked her to put this envelope on some dresser and thanked him for keeping his promise. Richard asked to put that vase on the floor. He's not going to go any further into the room, and the guy explains that he can't put the vase down because he hasn't decided where to move it yet. It looks very strange, but the Duke is holding his own. he's totally calm, just asking questions that are totally expected. At the very last moment, Antonio came up with the idea of putting the envelope directly into the vase since there was nothing wrong with it. He's definitely not going to let her go, but with each passing second, she seems to be getting heavier and heavier. If the Duke is very contained, he'll fall to the floor right with her. Surprisingly, so far, Richard doesn't notice anything suspicious. He even listens to the guy and has stopped asking a lot of questions. Antonio mentally struggles to ask that he do it quickly. Otherwise, there could be a lot of problems, and that was not all. The Duke said he would be sure to check the result of the rearrangement of the room, for he had never seen anyone want to do it so late, especially after such a hard day. Personally, he would never carry such vases and would postpone it for another day at least. Meanwhile, the door closed, they said their goodbyes. Rosalina put that vase on the floor and finally exhaled. This day had been too hard. If it kept going on like this, she wouldn't be able to take it anymore. And meanwhile, the next day came, and as usual, the girls had already arranged a tea party. For them, this time of day is the most beautiful. As agreed, each has her own servant, who is required to do nothing more than simply be present at her side. A few hours before, Katerina woke Antonio. She ordered him to pack quickly and told him they were going somewhere. There was no way Rosalina was going to disobey the lady's orders, no matter how much she wanted to. Now she stood there, just looking down and waiting for them to finish their tea. Of course, everything did not go as desired. Each of Katerina's friends paid attention to him, complimented him, as if they had never seen anyone prettier before. And Katerina's look literally says how much she likes this envy. She starts bragging, telling them that she's had him recently and agrees with their words that he's just irresistible. There's no one better than him. Girls say his mysterious dark green hair is so enchanting you could stare at it all day long. And the mesmerizing emerald eyes didn't seem to let go for a second. They even forgot what they were talking about as soon as they met his gaze. If Rosalind had gone out into society for a day before, she would have heard the same things, since she has received so many compliments when she may be considered to have spoiled her appearance. What might have been the case if they had seen the real her, as she was in ordinary life. Thanks to all those beautiful words, she was even in a better mood, smiling at everyone around her and forgetting that she had to pretend to be Antonio. She even managed to notice in time when she almost spoke in a normal voice, and if she did, it could be considered a lost cause. Luckily, it all turned out okay for those beautiful words and told him he was honored, and also that it was totally mutual. It was the first time he spoke to them in such a long sentence, and it even gave them goosebumps, moreover. One of them almost cried. Anyway, Rosalina decided to play along. They could be potential investors someday. Meanwhile, they are on their way home, and since Antonio had shown a lot of knowledge about hairstyles during the tea party, and had even given her friends some tips, Katerina thought it was strange. But he explained that he used to help his little sister a lot. She asked him to do different hairdos every day, and so he had learned almost everything he could think of. And then, so that no one would want to ask where she was, he told her that his sister had died. So surely no one will ask him a lot of questions about it. Katerina is a little sad and realizes she asked him that question for nothing. She even apologized for making him remember the tragedy and promised that it wouldn't happen again. Well, after that, she asked one favor, that he would style her hair if she had any important events to attend to. She likes to be and look her best, and he's perfectly capable of helping her do that, and easily. Suddenly, the girl cried. She remembered again that she had perhaps touched upon a very painful subject for him. After some more time, it so happened that she also found out about his debts, and to make it up to him, she offered to pay them all for him. It sounds very tempting, but Antonio replied that it's okay. His debt is too big and she doesn't have to do anything for him. Katerina was indignant. She repeated her question and reminded him that she has always been very rich and money is not a problem for her. But she just didn't expect the amount to be really big, like he said. 5,000. That's a lot even for her. Katerina froze in one place, even stopped blinking. The girl thought she had heard something. After all, she had never thought that ordinary people could only have debts. Even she rarely saw such an amount of money. The guy told her that he sold the house, got some of it back for a long time, but he still had about 3,000 to give, then asked her not to worry, because he already had a little plan in place. In any case, she would not let him off with the problem. She offered to arrange that he would work as a servant decorating 3 days a week, and for that, she would pay him enough to pay off his debt much faster. That was the most she could offer him. The guy did not expect this, He never thought that this girl, who at first seemed to him very rude and ill-mannered, is actually a wonderful person and can help those whom he knows not more than a couple of days. Rosalina hadn't counted on her before. Katerina rarely appeared in the story, but still, as things turned out, an additional source of income wouldn't hurt. Antonio hadn't even hoped for it in the beginning. And meanwhile, they drove on a little longer. And all this time, the girl was silent. She could not understand how the Duke could want money so badly as not to be in the position of people who had to sell their house just to pay him back. She became so ashamed that she doesn't even look Antonio in the eye. Moreover, she even wants to apologize again. She never thought that Richard cared so much about money that he showed no understanding. And she, as someone who was part of the duchy, had to apologize for him. She even promised that someday he'd have to face serious problems and take responsibility for his behavior. She'd make sure of it. It was so serious that she even asked him not to worry and told him that as long as he was with her, he would not be disturbed. She would protect Antonio, because from now on, he was part of her staff. The guy got a little nervous. He was very pleased to hear that, but at the same time, very awkward. He didn't expect to get help from such a nice girl, also from a ducal family. The next day came. They were already in the Duchy of Baltasar. It just so happened that all three of them met in the same corridor. Katerina asks Antonio to dine with her tonight, and he asks if it's allowed, since he's just a servant and usually such things are forbidden. She replies that it makes no difference. If she wants it, he can have it all. Suddenly, the Duke comes up and starts ruining everyone's mood with his stare. Katerina didn't expect to see him here. She didn't even say hello. Now she doesn't even want to look at him, let alone talk to him. After everything she'd learned about him, it was just outrageous, so he didn't wait for a word from her. Walking a little further, she turned to the aide and asked him to follow her, but he stopped, as he wouldn't be able to get past the Duke as easily as he did. It was a little embarrassing that instead of fulfilling his promise and working on making money, he had been doing nothing for the second day, even though it only seemed that way from the outside. If the Duke only knew that's all the guy was doing, he wouldn't be acting like this. Richard didn't like the fact that Antonio was very calm and walking so freely around the property. He asked if he had already collected 500 coins and how things were going with the artist's paintings. In his opinion, since he had time to go out with Katerina, everything was already done. The guy noticed that the Duke always talks very slowly, and it sounds a bit scary. At first, he couldn't even answer him anything, and then asked if they hadn't talked about him having 2 whole months, as far as he could remember. No other amendments yet. Richard doesn't retract his words, but he thinks that even if Antonio starts right away, he's unlikely to make that much money in time. The boy asked not to worry about it and hinted that everything was under control, and also explained that he was now a servant in the house and therefore could not ignore the lady's orders. Anyway, he's going to have to do what she asked him to do. He has to listen to everyone around here. That's his new role assigned by Richard himself. He starts to walk away. Doesn't notice that someone nearby was carrying a vase, pushing the man. And of course, all the water starts pouring out on the sides. Antonio was the one who suffered the most. Although if you look at the situation, that man could see everyone around and could have moved aside so that nothing like that happened. Katerina started to get very worried. She showed that she was genuinely worried about him and even ran over to make him feel better. All his clothes are wet. He's silent. He doesn't say a word, and that assistant didn't even apologize. After a while, Antonio had to do it. He said it was fine and promised to clean it up, although it's obvious to everyone that the guy is trying to soften the situation and actually cut himself a little bit. Surprisingly, there was no conflict. Everyone started helping each other. One Duke stood aside as if he didn't care. Meanwhile, the guy wanted to change. His clothes were soaking wet, and he was also very embarrassed. And from this moment, the most interesting thing begins. The guy didn't notice that when his clothes got wet, his blindfold, with which he hid everything that would show his female figure, became visible. The Duke saw it and thought it was some sort of medical bandage after a serious wound. He asked what had happened to him, but he said nothing of the sort. In that case, Richard doesn't realize that if there's nothing serious, what he needs it for and what he's hiding there, he even started to follow him to get a closer look. And that's just too bad. Rosalind is in a real panic. This is the most serious situation she has ever had to deal with. If he is asked to remove the blindfold, everyone will know the truth and it's unclear what will happen to her after that. Suddenly, Katerina didn't even want to get into anything. She immediately started defending and said that Antonio hit because of her. She just didn't want to talk about it. She had no idea what he was hiding behind that blindfold. She just wanted to help him, because the Duke would believe her for sure, and probably wouldn't even check it out. She explained that she had recently slipped while getting out of the carriage. Antonio had been helping her and had fallen and hurt himself on the edge. She saw it herself, and after saying that, Richard had no more questions. He even stopped looking at the assistant. The only thing left to find out is if Catherine wants to know the real reason why he has a bandage there. The girl looked at him as if she suspected something, but she didn't know what it was yet anyway. Thanks to her, it wasn't as dangerous as it could have been. The Duke says that since it was his sister's fault, he apologizes for it. Katerina was at the same second very much angered by these words. She went up to him and asked him, since when did he become interested in anything that concerned her safety or condition of the... Surprisingly, nothing serious happened. It just became clear that they don't like each other, and any chance they get, there's a conflict. The Duke had already decided to leave, and lastly, he asked how Antonio was feeling. In fact, Richard didn't think the boy would have so many responsibilities here, and all because of his sister. He hopes that he is not overstretched and everything suits him. The main thing is that all this does not prevent him from doing the main thing, making money. But if he thinks Richard will give him any indulgences, he won't. Antonio must remember that his body won't belong to him until he pays off all his debts. Katerina never ceases to wonder how her brother can say such things. She dislikes it very much, even more than Antonio himself. And since they were already alone, he did not miss the opportunity to ask why she was helping him, since he, as a man, should solve all his problems himself and not rely on anyone else. She replied that it was very simple. You could see the anxiety and fear on his face very clearly that it wasn't going to work out, and she could never get over if her brother was the reason why a man who couldn't physically pay him any kind of debt would get hurt. Those were very beautiful and right words. She acts like a very long-time person. And surprisingly, it was the last thing he expected from her, especially on the first day of meeting her. As she has promised, she repeats that she will protect him from this tyrant. Even if she has to suffer herself, Antonio can't even express his gratitude and says that she doesn't even know why he really wears the bandage and what it's for. Turns out she's totally uninterested. She said it doesn't make any difference, because maybe he has some scars that, like any other person, he just doesn't want to show anyone. That's it. Then, she changed the subject at once and asked if he was aware that there was to be a tea party at the Marquise's daughter's the other day. All he had to do was to stand by and be handsome. Of course he agreed and promised that it would go off in the best possible way. Meanwhile, the next day came. Rosalind had tried to go to bed early last night so that she could wake up early and go somewhere. She came here in a special staff carriage. The journey took a lot less time than she thought it would, and that's a very good thing. The girl is in the heart of Algris. She knew it as soon as she saw everything around her. It's very atmospheric here. In the original, the protagonist found the first artwork in this village. From then on, she started supporting unknown artists. There must be someone somewhere around here selling paintings. But so far, Rosalind doesn't see anyone, though she thought they were here at every turn, and there shouldn't have been a problem at all. Everyone started offering him their goods, and one woman asked if he needed any help. The girl asked who she could buy a painting from, to which she replied that she hadn't seen the artists here for a very long time, and didn't even know why they had stopped selling their work. It was a real shock. The girl was not prepared for it. She didn't take this moment into account, and now she doesn't know what to do about it. She needs to find these paintings anyway. Luckily, the woman gave the address of one artist and said she could go to his house. Of course, it was the very last hope. Rosalind thanked her and at once began to look for the right address. Also, there is a small clue. This man had some painted roses on the door of the house of a small size, so to recognize the door will not be difficult. It only took 10 minutes and Rosalina was already at his house. One hopes he is here now and will not have to look for this artist all over the village. She knocked and asked if anyone was home or not, but no answer was heard. There was nowhere to go, so she had to wait in case the person was resting and could not open the door so easily. But no one had been gone for a very long time. She thought there was no such thing. For judging from the original, he must surely be at his house. There's no way the man could have moved to another city or another house. She starts banging harder and much longer. At last a miracle happens. The door opens and she sees before her the very man she expected. He is very displeased that she has disturbed him and asks her who she is, or rather who she is, and who gave her this address. This artist's name is Abello. Many people know him by sight. He used to be at the market every day, and even though no one bought anything, he still came and hoped for something. When it came time to explain what she had come for, the girl happened to see behind his back a picture on the wall that fit perfectly with the... It is also the same as in the description of the story. The girl made sure that she had not mistaken the address. This is where the first picture of the princess collection lurks. The girl spoke in a male voice, introduced herself, and explained that she had stumbled upon his work by chance and now wanted to see him in person. You could see that the artist didn't really want to talk. He even closed the door before the guy had said everything he wanted to say. And if he didn't think it was a little aggressive, now it's scary to knock on that door again in case the man gets really angry and never speaks to him again. It feels like the artist is avoiding people. Although the princess in the original story did everything very quickly, she just said a few words and she had the painting. Suddenly, Rosalina was seen by some girl watching her from around the corner, and when she saw that she was spotted, she started walking away. Of course, I had no choice. I had to go up to her and ask her if she lived in the house. She was a little scared and even turned her back. To calm her down a bit and make friends, Rosalina asked why she was here alone and where her parents were. The girl replies that her mom forbids talking to strangers. Although if you fall asleep on this side, Rosalina has forgotten that she doesn't look cute at all, also pretending to be a guy that some kid would hardly want to talk to. In that case, so that the girl would no longer be afraid, Antonio apologized for frightening her and said he'd leave right away. Suddenly, the girl is only now coming to grips with what's really going on here. She's surprised how she didn't realize it right away. This house has obviously been without owners for a long time. This child has not been taken care of for a long time. It is very clear from the appearance of the house. Meanwhile, the Duke also has business to attend to. He is somewhere with his assistant and asks why they do not want to build a school here. In such a small town, there is not a single educational institution. It is unlikely that the locals can afford an education for their children in the capital, where several times more expensive. He explains to Alejandro that this isn't just a small town. There are so many prospects here that they haven't noticed in so many years. This place is bypassed by traders discharging between the capital and the duchy, as everything is concentrated in the capital. This city is also growing. It will develop even more in the future. Since there is already an academy for the aristocracy, it is best to build a school for the middle class and peasants. It is very important that everyone has the opportunity to learn according to their abilities. Alejandro didn't expect to hear that from him, and said that Richard is an expert at this kind of thing, to which he replies that he's not only an expert at this, he's always been the best at everything. It turns out they're near the market where Rosalina was just now, and even though she's long gone, there's a good chance they'll meet. Unlike her, they're not in a hurry and they're looking around very carefully so they'll be able to spot her easily. Meanwhile, the girl won't stop working. She's not going to spin back around before she's done anything useful. It would be a shame to have to get up so early, drive a long way, and end up wasting time. In the original story, when the princess first met the artist, things happened in a much more interesting way than they did in Rosalind. Then she didn't even have to run away. Hide. She calmly came to this address, and before she even got to the door, she was seen by the same little girl, accidentally thinking it was her mom. The painter never suspected anything. He sat quietly in his seat and paid no attention to the girl. The child looked closely, saw a very familiar silhouette, and of course, without hesitation, concluded that it was definitely her, the mother, whom she had been waiting for a long time. The girl had no idea how disappointed she'd be when she found out she was so very wrong. She shouted very loudly throughout the house that her mother had come, and after these words, the man began to stop her because he understood that no mother could be here. The girl is already outside. She hugged the princess so much that the princess didn't even realize right away. Is she really so loved by the children in this village? But when she heard her name being called, she knew right away that something was wrong. When she saw the tears, she thought it would be better to be quiet and talk to someone adult. The painter runs out of the house. Then he was very ashamed. He apologized and immediately told the girl that it was not her mother. Of course, the artist recognized the princess at once. He would never have allowed himself to do to her what he had done to Antonio. He hugged the girl and explained to the princess that his wife had died some time ago. She was very much like her, so his reign was a little mistaken. The princess replied that he didn't need to apologize. It was fine, especially since it wasn't the child's fault that she saw someone very similar to her mother and her behavior was quite normal. About a month later, the artist was to see the protagonist, the princess, in the marketplace. As she thought, he saw his late wife in the protagonist and even became a little sad himself. And in the meantime, after waiting for the right time, shopping for wigs, The girl changed her clothes just like a princess usually looks like. She repeated with precision the scenario that was supposed to be. She went up to the girl and explained that she really liked it, but she wasn't her mom, and that she was sorry about the situation, so she offered to take her for a walk so she wouldn't be sad. In the end, it didn't work out. The kid cried, and there's nothing to be done about it anyway. The good thing is that this time the artist didn't suspect anything. After that, the girl went to her father and asked how long she had to wait for her mom. Apparently, he hadn't told her what really happened yet, and when he talked to the princess about it, she just didn't hear it. Maybe it was better that way. Then he hugged his daughter very gently, promised that everything would be all right, and thought it wouldn't hurt to apologize to the princess. He doesn't like it when someone sees that they are in some kind of trouble. The artist comes up and says that he is sorry that she had to observe such an unpleasant picture, to which she replies that it is all right. On the contrary, she wants to support the girl and be with her at least for a while. Then, he asked what she was doing here and what he could do to help. Besides, the princess was not at all the kind of person who would come to a neighborhood like this. And then he thought about it and decided it was obvious. Since she'd come to his house, she was probably interested in the paintings. Now it all made sense to him. It wasn't hard to guess why a person like her had suddenly decided to come to these parts, and of course he had offered to come in. He is ready to show all his works and even make a small discount, so that the girl chose any painting that she likes the most. When they went to the kitchen, he began to apologize that his house was not in the best shape, and all because lately he had no earnings at all. The girl replied that on the contrary, it was very cozy and in general, it was very pleasant to be here. The main thing was that the house was warm and had delicious tea, and after that, she began to look more and more at the one picture she had come for. It was the one she had seen behind his back the first time. A painting so beautiful that it looks like it is worth a lot of money and may even be priceless. She is very sorry that the artist often undervalues his labor and his work, because his masterpieces can cost a lot of money, and he used to sell it all for pennies. In fact, if she were a real princess and had a lot of money, she would pay a very good price, but unfortunately that possibility doesn't exist right now. This painting, it's his last work. Since he finished it, he hasn't painted anything else or even been outside. He even admitted that when he had seen Erlene, his daughter, moments earlier, he had realized that he was not the only one left alone, but that the little girl was going through it all, although he had never even thought about it before. The child had to do it even harder, and in fact he is very grateful to the princess that it was only thanks to her that he finally realized it and paid attention to it. He didn't realize it for a long time, and he finally realized the most important thing. His daughter is having a much harder time than he is. And when it came to the painting, he agreed to sell it, though the girl doubted very much whether he would do so. She asked how it could be, for she was very dear to them as a memory, and if she were him, she would never give her to anybody. The artist explained that he had been too selfish up until now. He was stuck on this painting and could not move on, so the sooner he got rid of it, the quicker and easier he could start a new life. He's sure it's the most ordinary picture that doesn't deserve so much attention, suffering, and pause in development. It's the only thing he's in trouble for because of it. He has long wanted to take himself in hand for the sake of his daughter, sell this painting. It is received and the money to buy new clothes, and also very much wants to buy some toys for his little princess. She had never had anything like it. And now, moreover, it was what his wife had always wanted, so her wish would be granted. And also, lastly, he decided to thank the princess, because thanks to her, he came to his senses much faster than he could have been. And of course, he was very happy about this acquaintance. To which she replies that she is very happy about it, and also that she can guarantee him one thing: his painting will soon be recognized as a true masterpiece of art. The man at first did not understand how she had so much confidence in this, and she explained that it could not be otherwise. Many people were bound to recognize her worth, and if he continued in this business, his to great successes. In the future, he will definitely become a great artist who received the support of the royal family. He deserves it for a long time. The main thing is not to stop and go to his dream. Then they said goodbye, and surprisingly, it went very well. Everyone was satisfied and even promised each other to meet again someday. Anyway, the girl is very glad she did it. It took a little effort, but it was worth it. She's walking down the street, she doesn't notice anything, and suddenly she accidentally pushes a man, and I was about to get angry, but she noticed in time. Who it was, had to apologize and say she hadn't noticed him. The Duke didn't even want to look in her direction. He was all about his own business, but did so nonetheless, really wondering if he would recognize her or not, and so far, instead of teaching her to watch her step, the guy was worried if she hurt herself and if she was okay. Rosalina can't believe her eyes. She can barely contain herself from panicking because everything could go wrong at any moment. She's more scared than ever. She's sitting on the floor and doesn't know how to act, and she's getting more and more attention.